Hi guys, my name's Bernie. I just want to talk about a topic that's quite important for a lot of us, and it's in Appendix 2 at the back of the book. The term spirituality and spiritual awakening, and you'll find it on page 567. But on the last page, there's a little wording that says. There is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all argument, which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. And Bill wrote that for a particular reason because um, everybody thought in the early days of AA, especially in the first edition of the big book, that when Bill had that flash of white light in the town's hospital in New York, St. Thomas's, on the 14th of, I think it was December, everybody thought that, they had to have some kind of flash of light where they've connected to have a spiritual experience. Well, of course, that's incorrect. And the reason he wrote that, contempt prior to investigation, is to remind a lot of newcomers or people in the early stages of recovery that there's no one way of having a spiritual awakening, or a spiritual experience. And Bill had that awakening. He had that flash of white light. For me and for most people in the program, they have what's known as the spiritual experiences because it comes at a slower pace. And that's okay. It doesn't really matter, you know. And that confused a lot of people in the very, very early days of AA. So there's no one way of having a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening. There's certainly no one way of living a spiritual life as well. You cannot condense spirituality like you can a tin of sardines. It's such an open concept, spirituality. But contempt prior to investigation is very, very important. Herbert Spencer didn't actually write it. It was contributed to him. It's the same with the Step 11 prayer, St. Francis. It wasn't actually written by St. Francis, because it came around into circulation more or less 600 or 700 years later, in a little French village, and it was originally given to the soldiers when they were in the trenches. So yeah, it's just something Bill used, and he usually quoted from some great sort of spiritual people in the past. So William James, a guy called William James, Variety of Religious Experience. If you read any of his stuff, he kind of explains many different ways of having spiritual experiences or spiritual awakenings. So there's no one way, and that's so important, and just to kind of really sum it all up, in the promises, I think it's page 83 and 84 at the bottom, it quotes, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but they'll always materialize if you work for them. So sometimes quickly, a spiritual awakening, sometimes slowly, a spiritual experience. They happen at the same time, just different times, if that makes sense. It doesn't really matter. But that vital spiritual psychic change or spiritual connection is so important in the program. So don't be frightened of it. It kind of happens naturally anyway. For some of us, it can happen very, very quickly. And unfortunately for me, I'm the educational variety. I had to learn that kind of thing on a slower basis. But it was important that I read that and understood that, because otherwise I'd been sitting there waiting for somebody with a magic wand to hit me over the head with and a flash of light. It does not work that way. It works through practicing the steps, and certainly listening to your sponsor, certainly reading the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there's certainly the spiritual concept of this program will give you that idea of how spirituality works. Really, at the end of the day, it's spirituality is you, but it's we're not spiritually gurus in any form at all. We're just people, but our knowledge and our connection and staying closer is important. We don't become spiritual. I think we just get closer to something and connect. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. So contempt prior to investigation can be used as a concept also in the program. Well, how I see and feel about people, how I thought about the program when I first came, how I thought about people. But because it's a disease of perception, our reality changes as time goes on. And that's part of the spiritual growth, really. We see things for what they really are. So have a nice day, guys, and I wish you well. Bye.